Okay. So as always, we start with our prayer in the beginning of the class. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay. So wherever we were into a little bit of basics last time, right? We were trying to figure out the solar system, the way it was mapped by the ancients, and how the zodiac and the various traditions got blended in. We'll do a little bit of that today. We'll kind of go ahead from there. We'll possibly be able to cover the basic structure of the chart, right? A little bit of astronomy. And then today we'll make the shift into astrology from astronomy, right? Given the computer systems and the kind of softwares we have access to, we don't have to worry too much about the whole idea of, how do I get all of these coordinates from the sky mapped onto a piece of paper. Those are elementary mathematics of astrology, but softwares kind of help us do that. However, as students of the subject, a fair working knowledge of the whole thing is a good idea. And so we'll keep it to a working knowledge without going into too many details, because that's where astrology can become very boring. And this is where we were. We are on Earth, right? We see everything else moving around us, including the sun. We use reference points to map the sky called the zodiac or the nakshatras. A point to note always is that any of these stars, any of these asterisms, or any of these patterns that you see in the sky is on a certain amount of degree span within which the pattern must form. So what they did was, when you looked at from the Earth and you placed the center of the Earth to the center of the sun and kind of came to a point here somewhere, 8 degrees above and 8 degrees below that center point. So that's a 16-degree span. So any of the patterns that we see in the sky, all the patterns of the zodiac, will fall in that 16-degree latitude, or not latitude in the sense of the coordinates, but that span of 16 degrees. And all of these stars form in that shape. So that brings some level of uniformity to the entire structure. And so what happens is that when we are on Earth, right, which is actually moving around the sun, but what we observe is the sun moving around us. What's actually happening is that on a particular date, we could be here and we see the sun and we have a background of a certain pattern or a zodiac. And so we feel that the sun is moving in that zodiac. Now, if we change the position of Earth from here to, let's say, somewhere here, then the point of observation will fall somewhere in this span. And hence we feel, okay, the sun is moving across each of these zodiacs in the way that we have done it. Also, what happened is that the entire idea of equinoxes, right? So there is a challenge in kind of mapping the stars because the Earth is not stable. The Earth's axis has been tilting over a period of time, right? As if in a few, I don't know, maybe a few thousand years, the poles may actually reverse, or something of that kind may happen because the tilt is continuous from a certain period of time when it was observed to what it has become now, right? But before we go into all of that, right, just a quick idea of what the two-dimensional representation of a horoscope looks like. Now, there are two formats essentially that are followed globally. Any conference you go to, someone's class that you attend at some point in time, they would use either of the formats. Now, the formats are representing the same principles and the same ideas, but it's just that the representation is done in a different way. In the north of India, you get a diagram which has got these diamond shapes, or a diamond they call it a diamond or diamond format. And then you have a square format, which is mostly practiced in the south of India. So some scholars, and depending upon the kind of school you're coming from, some teachers teach the South Indian format, some teachers are comfortable with the North Indian format. The way we will do it is, for most of the illustrations that we do during the next 1 year, we'll use both the formats. So depending upon which one you are more comfortable with, if you have been kind of studying the subject, you may be comfortable with either one of them. If you aren't, then I'm very familiar with the North Indian format. But then when it comes to Gemini astrology, which we will do towards the end of the year, I'm more familiar with the South Indian chart, because then the Rashi Drishtis and the aspects are very easy to see there. But we will use both formats across all our sessions, so you don't have to worry about that. This is what the chart looks like. And what is it? It's nothing else but at the specific moment that you were born, right? And now there's a debate around that, whether what is the moment of birth? Is it the placenta being cut off? So that represents the fact that you are no more dependent and you are here as an independent life. Some say it's the moment the first breath is taken, because that is when life begins. Breath is life, and life ends when breath ends. So there's that other school. And the third school of thought says that when that baby, after the placenta is cut off and he starts breathing, because they hang them upside down and slap them to kind of take the first, to take out all the fluids and then take their first breath, are then put on the ground. Traditionally, they would be placed on the earth, right? Because there were no other hospital systems like we have today. So they said that is when he comes into contact with earth. So not only is he breathing, but all influences on earth is when we are in contact with earth. There are three schools of thought. Now, is there a problem with that? Not really. But it's just that depending on how much time has elapsed, typically between all of this, right? So hospital records typically will consider the baby alive when the baby cries for the first time or takes the gasp of breath, right? That's when hospital systems go, all is good, the baby is fine now. And so typically what is recorded in today's times as the time of birth is that moment when the breath is taken. And we go by that. And we kind of go by the fact that, yes, it's fine. Unless, of course, there was a special case, where the baby was delivered, the placenta was cut off, but the baby did not breathe for, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. And those 2, 3, 4 minutes sometimes can make a lot of difference, right? Because some of the longitudes or some of the latitudes will change, or the derived charts, as they are called, the divisional charts, would undergo a change because they are very sensitive to time, right? So maybe a 2-minute change changes some divisional charts. But by and large, it is the moment you are born, and then the moment the kid is born, if you looked at the eastern horizon from where everything on Earth rises, so we say the sun rises from the east, all the planets rise from the east and set in the west. So when you look at that point, and then you extend your vision to say, what is the planetary pattern in the nakshatra category, not the zodiac? What is that planetary pattern on which was rising on the horizon? So all of these zodiacs are also rising and setting like the planets because of the Earth's movement. And hence you say which one was rising. And so that rising sign, zodiac, is fixed as the rising ascendant of the chart, right? So that's what called the lagna, or the ascendant as we call it. Now, there are two systems which follow. The Western system follows a slightly different method. The Vedic astrology system follows a slightly different method. Sun is the primary factor for the calculation of everything in the Western astrology. And it uses what is called the tropical method, right? The tropical method is about the elliptic of the sun, of the earth around the sun. You've heard of the term equinoxes, right? You have the autumn equinox and you have the spring equinox. And that's when they kind of say, okay, where is the sun? What sign was the sun moving in? Like we saw in the previous diagram. And they would consider that to be the rising Navamsha or the rising Lagna. Not, there is quite a bit of difference between the way then that gets calculated and the way the Vedic chart gets calculated. The Vedic chart has a second very important reference point, which is the moon, right? So the moon's placement at that point in time across a certain asterism as we looked at the moon when the moment of birth happened will also give us a coordinate and a zodiac and a nakshatra where the moon was placed. So you have the zodiac on the top, and behind that you have the layer of nakshatras, right? So within each zodiac, there'll be certain nakshatras. So that point is picked up for the calculation of the dasha sequence, which is one of the unique things that Vedic astrology has and Western does not, is the entire idea of dashas. And dashas for us decide the kind of experience that one is likely to have over a certain period of time. So that is referenced from moon, while the rising zodiac is taken as the lagna. So there's a combination of those two, and we see how the ancient Hindu systems were possibly, merged with the Hellenistic traditions, and a combination arrived at. The total sky, now it's not exactly a sphere which is round. We don't know the shape or the structure of the universe around us. We don't know what shape it is. But again, observing from the Earth, we see kind of everything moving in a circle with the Earth in the center, right? And so it's been taken to be 360 degrees. We have 12 zodiac signs, and hence we arrive at units, 12 units of 30 degrees each, which constitute a zodiac, which constitute a house or a bhava as it is called. And we'll get into some more details. Now, each Rashi, as per the Vedic system, was then further divided into 9 segments. So each of the 30-degree segments are divided by 9, and you get a segment of 3 degrees 20 minutes. Okay, now this is all Greek at this point in time, don't worry, but we'll see the use and application, and we'll go into more details later. So a Rashi divided by 9, 30 degrees divided by 9, gives us smaller segments of 3 degrees 20, which is a very fundamental part of the way the whole Hindu system and the Hindu calendar also works. Because it's not a solar calendar, right? It's a calendar based on the movement of the moon. All our festivals are basis moon occupying a certain nakshatra at a certain point of time. And so that movement is far more precise, and that is taken as the most essential calculation. Since it is divided by 9, the term used is Navamsha, because Nava means 9, Amsha means part. So it's the 9 parts of the 30 degrees of the zodiac. Again, we are seeing mathematically how the sky was being divided by 2 different traditions, and how both the traditions got merged by kind of dividing the sky and keeping the mathematics intact. So the 360 remained intact. You got the zodiac of 30 degrees. You got the Navamsha for 3 degrees 20 within each zodiac. So it's an equal division across the sky. When you add 360 by as many times, which means 9 into 12, you'll still get 360, right? Then there is the idea of nakshatra. Now, the nakshatra span is a little odd compared to the uniformity that we've had so far of the bhavas and the zodiac and the Navamsha within the zodiac. The nakshatra span, which was the original way, let's say, parts of the Indian subcontinent, the observers had already divided the sky. And they had to now overlay the zodiac on top of that. So each nakshatra spans about 13 degrees 20 minutes. Okay. So what happens now is that if you take two nakshatras, 13, 20 each, it becomes 26 degrees and 40 minutes. So it's not an exact 30, right? So there's some part left over. What is interesting is that what is left over is exactly 3 degrees 20 minutes. So then that segment of the nakshatra goes into the next zodiac, and so forth and so on. The way it looks, I'll show it to you in a minute, but I thought we'll just get familiar with the elements as you see them on a birth chart. What do we have? We have two methods in which it is represented, right? Now, some programs will show all of these. Some programs in the South Indian chart do not show the numbers. One corresponds to Aries, the sign of the zodiac, and then from 2 to Taurus, 3 is Gemini, etc., right up to 12. In the North Indian chart, when you see these numbers appear, right, you have 1 over here somewhere, 2 here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These numbers in the North Indian format represent the zodiac. So when we see 1 here, we say this is where Aries zodiac was located at the time of the birth of the person, right? And then in the South Indian format, you have it written as ARITAUGEM, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, etc. Now, what happens is that there is a certain amount of what remains fixed in the North Indian, what remains fixed in the South Indian form. And we will come to that. What you also see within the chart is the abbreviated form of each of the elements or the grahas or the planets. We have a total of 9, right? They are abbreviated as thus. And then depending on where they were placed at the time of birth of this person, they are represented by those abbreviations to say, this is where the planets were, this is how the sky looked like when this person was born. The abbreviation AS, represents ascendant or lagna. So you will always find this in the North Indian chart located exactly here. It will not change. So this remains fixed in the North Indian format, which means whatever zodiac was rising at that time of birth will be represented by this number. So for this person, for example, he was born in 7, which corresponds to Libra. So which means he is a Libra rising ascendant, is the way we would say that. And then the moon was also in Libra constellation. So moon was also traversing Libra. So the moon is placed here. We have 11 for Mars, which means 11 corresponds to Aquarius, and so forth and so on. Coming to the South Indian chart, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. will remain fixed, right? They don't change the rising ascendant by any format. So what they've done is they've fixed all the zodiacs exactly the way they are. So what they do is that depending on, so we have Libra and we have AS. In the South Indian format, you come to LIBR, which is Libra. You find the AS written there. And typically in almost every software, even if they don't write AS, you will find a small diagonal line in that box. Wherever the diagonal line is, it means that is the ascendant rising in this chart. And you'll see the planetary placements to be exactly the same. Mars says 11, which is Aquarius. You also have Mars in AQU, which is Aquarius, right? So the Rashis or the zodiac signs do not change. Whereas in North Indian format, if a person was born in Cancer rising on the eastern horizon, then number 4 would get placed in this box in the top, right? And then you do the numbering after that. So you have 7, 8, 9, you'll get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so forth and so on. Before we go, just a quick note. AS is ascendant. The numbers in the North Indian chart are the zodiac sign. Then there is the idea of bhava. Okay, the bhava, the whole idea of bhava is the core central idea to anything that we do between the planets and the bhavas is where the entire interpretive astrology lies. And which is why we kind of spend a lot of time understanding bhavas. We spend a lot of time understanding planets because it is the interaction of these that everything depends upon. So the bhavas in the North Indian format will start with the ascendant. In any format, they will always start with the ascendant. The rising ascendant represents the first bhava. And then the others follow in a numeric order from 1 to 12. So we have 12 zodiacs, we have 12 bhavas. The number here is not the number of the bhava or the house. It is the zodiac. This remains fixed. It's always the first bhava. This is always the second bhava. This is always the third bhava, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 9, 10, 11, 12. What happens in the South Indian format, however, is that the numbers that you see, right, is starting with 1 wherever the ascendant is placed, which means that wherever the ascendant gets placed in the South Indian chart, which means this is the ascendant that was rising in the east, gets labeled as 1. So this represents bhava or house in the South Indian format. So which means the bhavas would change with the ascendant changing. So if I were born in Sagittarius and you were born in, let's say, Scorpio, then the number 1 for me would be here somewhere where Cancer, CAN, is written. Whereas for the person born in Scorpio, the AS would come here. And hence, number 1 will come here and number 1 will come here. And then the counting will start. You may have observed that what is happening is that everything, all the counting that's happening in the North Indian chart is going in a certain direction, right? Which is counterclockwise. Whereas in the South Indian chart, everything moves in a clockwise direction. They represent exactly the same ideas. It's just that the way it's been represented is a little different. Here it was found convenient to have the bhavas fixed and change the rashis depending upon which one arose. The ascendant is always fixed. It's always the first house. And in the South Indian chart, the ascendant gets marked depending upon the zodiac sign rising. In all of our classes, you will get exactly similar formats. So the format we will follow is that in the South Indian chart, they are labeled with Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. The numbers will appear indicating the house of the bhava. Whereas in the North Indian chart, the bhavas are always fixed and hence they are not labeled. The numbers represent the zodiac sign. The ascendant remains fixed. Okay? Any confusions? Don't worry, you'll get used to it. When you see 20, 30 charts, repeatedly, you'll make a couple of errors in saying, oh, this was one, or this was one, and you may get a little confused. But as you see more charts, it becomes more comfortable. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Oh, where is the presentation disappeared? Okay. Just a sec. With that, as we move, now something is not going right. It's mimicking my screen, but not moving it. Let me just pause recording and let me come back with sharing. Yeah, we are. So some important terms that we would be using, and it's good. It's a good idea to kind of get used to them, remember them as much as you can. Uh, Over a period of time, again, it will happen as we use them more and more. The first thing is Jyotisha. Of course, we know that it's the ancient astrology as practiced in the Indian subcontinent. Ayanamsha, we will talk about it a little bit in some time. It measures the tilt of the Earth relative to the celestial equator. Right? The celestial equator is nothing else, but if you were to consider the Earth to be the north and south to be absolutely vertical, and then the equator, if you equate, if you just drew a line from the equator to the sun, and then said, okay, this is where if this is what the orbit is, then that becomes the celestial equator or a reference point from a certain point in time. And we will look at what that point in time was. Graha, or celestial bodies of Jyotisha, they are considered the messengers of the divine, and all divinations take place through the medium of the planets or the grahas. We prefer to call them grahas because there is something about that word, we will find out why it's a more descriptive way rather than calling them a planet. Right? A planet is a planet. Rashi is the sign of the zodiac you're aware of. Bhava, or houses. This is important because each one of them, represents a certain area of life. So when we do interpretation of a chart, and if someone is asking you about a certain area of life, then we know what is the reference that we are examining. We examine that part and figure out what are the planetary influences and draw some conclusions. Vakri, or crooked. Yeah, Vakri, the word names crooked. In astronomical sense, it is when the planet appears to be moving in a retrograde direction. A retrograde direction means it's not normal. It appears to move in a slightly different way in certain points of time when we observe them from the Earth. This is when recently, if you heard that a lot of people were talking about, you can see 5 planets from Earth, right? If you were at the right point in time and you were under a clear sky, they said the planet, the parade of the planets, as it was called recently. And that's because they're closer to the Earth. So retrograde planet is closer to the Earth and hence considered important because it's considered to be able to exert more influence, right? Especially the outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Sthira, the word sthira means steady, stable, or fixed in nature, right? Anything that's sthira has a certain implication, which means the opposite. If it is not sthira and it's movable or unstable, it will have an implication. Karaka. The word karak means the one which makes or causes an event or related to a certain event, right? So the term karaka will come up from time to time. Just a good idea to kind of get a sense of what these mean from a Hindi to an English context. Naisargika is another word which is based on the fact that there is something innate or there is something inherent in that in quality in that body or anything that we are studying. So that is the basic core nature of, and this is mostly related to planets or grahas. And lastly, tatkalika, which means it is in the moment and it's in the here and now. So there is something which is innate and natural or instinctive, but in a certain context, it becomes in the moment what is it that it is doing. And hence, the varies, the whole idea of so many ways to interpret a chart is because there are so many points of view that you kind of take and understand what a planet is really doing. But not to worry, this will keep coming up. We will continue to use Hindi, English, both for a period of time and gradually shift to the Hindi terminologies of each of these. Dasha, last and not the least, is the period of time related to a certain graha or a planet which a person undergoes. So remember, we spoke about the placement of the moon at a certain place. And then from there, we calculate when you were born, what is the time, what is the period you were running, and so forth, and so on for the entire life. Well, cultural integration happened. We spoke of this, of how the Hellenistic and the Vedic traditions came together. 1320 degrees, 27 nakshatras. The moon's movement across each nakshatra is important. In the Hellenistic tradition, we adopted the zodiac, which was 30 degrees each, fits into the 360. And then both of them were merged to kind of create a horoscope and find out how each planet could be in a nakshatra within a zodiac. So each zodiac will have certain nakshatras. So you get another depth of interpretive symbolism to say, what does that nakshatra represent? And does it influence that planet in the way that planet expresses itself? There could be nakshatras which are categorized into those which are aggressive, those which are more, let's say, more related to kindness and love and generosity. There are some which are related to medicine and health and so forth and so on. And there are some nakshatras which represent, asceticism. Some of them represent power and position, right? So 27 nakshatras have their own symbology, which we will do much later, because that's a more subtle, layering of the interpretation. The more obvious is the bhava, the rashi, and the planet. And then you layer the nakshatra on top of that. Well, this is what the sky would look like if we represented it in a circular diagram, integrating everything, okay? Now, what has been considered as the starting point? So in this whole 360, how do you map it? Where do you start from? That's one big question. So the way this was done was, if Earth was here, right, and the sky was all around it, then you looked at from the Earth, you aligned it to a star that seems absolutely fixed. So for many years when they observed, they said, while the zodiac shifts, because that's relatively closer to the Earth, the stars are very, very far away, right? These are these big alpha, beta, and all these words that you hear about stars. So they picked a star which was absolutely fixed and appeared day on day at exactly the same position, doesn't matter what part of the year. And so they said, fine, this is where we will start the counting of the zodiac from. And so the inner circle, the white inner circle, represents the zodiac. So they said, this is where this will be 0 degrees Aries. So this is the 0 degree point. That's your reference point. And then from there, 30 degrees will be Aries, 30 degrees will be Taurus, and 30 will be Gemini. And they kept dividing the sky in 30-degree segments to arrive back at Pisces. And the 360-degree gets completed. Then you had the nakshatras, right? So there was a problem with the nakshatras. And so you said, okay, in Aries, the first 3 degrees, 13 degrees, 20 goes to a nakshatra called Ashwini, from where the counting begins. The next one is Bharani, which is another 13, 20, and we are still in Aries, right? Just to give you a visual representation, don't get bothered by this, that, I have to remember this or something. Just give you a concept of the division of the sky. And then you notice that Aries continues beyond Bharani for a small segment, right? But the third nakshatra has started, because 1320 is over, 1320 is over, the next 1320 begins. So the first 3 degrees 20, which was left here, is given to the third nakshatra, And the balance, then this dividing line cuts across Kritika and leaves the balance portion in the next sign called Taurus. So it's a little complex at this stage, don't worry. But just to just get an idea that they somehow managed to get the division of the 27 so fairly well done that the 3° 20 divisions helped to kind of map them exactly to 360 degrees. So there are nakshatras, there is a Rashi, and then each nakshatra is allocated a planet, an associated planet, right? Now, this is only for when we study the Vimshottari Dasha. For the other Dasha systems, the planetary markers may shift or change, right, as the rishis are prescribed. But we are not going there yet. We'll keep it simple. Let's move on. What if you've heard the name or the word or the number being spoken about in the Hindu system, 108, right? 108 comes up again and again. You go to a pandit, you go to a mandir, you want to do a certain mantra, they'll say, do it 108 times. So this number 108 comes from the fact that if you take 27, right, and multiply it by 4, you'll get 108. Why 4? Now that's the idea. Because each 13-20 degree segment of a nakshatra is broken up into 4 parts of 320, 320, 320, 320. Okay? So 4 padas or 4 parts of a nakshatra multiplied by 27 nakshatra leads to 108. And so they say that when you chant a mantra 108 times, it registers in every segment of the universe. So it goes in all directions. The sound vibrations go out and they take care of every segment of every nakshatra. So every nakshatra is covered, all the planets are covered, all the zodiac is covered. So a nakshatra goes out into the universe and releases certain vibrations, which then cause related changes, etc. The whole idea of mantra is around this number, and this is how the number comes into the system. Let's take a quick look at what was the a little bit of astronomy 101 in terms of the equinoxes, the whole idea of equinoxes, the whole idea of the tilt of the earth and how and what it is happening. Now, if all of us know that throughout school geography, what we study, that the earth is round, is not the fact, right? The earth is not a perfect sphere. The earth is a little, pressed towards the center and bulges towards the sides. The equator is where the diameter of the earth is the widest. Plus, the mass distribution of earth is not equal in terms of, the sphere being completely balanced. So there is a little wobble in the Earth's movement. And so it helps us understand the idea of equinoxes. Oh, I'll send you the link.
Precession is the movement of the rotational axis of an object. It is commonly seen in toy tops, but all spinning objects can demonstrate precession. In astronomy, we are most interested in the precession of Earth. The orbital tilt obliquity of Earth is 23.5 degrees. Thus, the axis of Earth's rotation traces out a cone of half-angle 23.5 degrees in a period of roughly 26,000 years. This effect is often referred to as precession of the equinoxes. The technical details behind precession are beyond the physics covered in introductory astronomy, but they focus on the fact that Earth is not spherically symmetric but oblate, fatter around the middle, and the gravitational pulls of the Sun and Moon on this equatorial bulge cause precession. I will demonstrate precession with what is known as an air gyroscope. This particular model was manufactured by Ealing Corporation in 1956. We will observe precession on this 4-inch steel ball, and a pump will force air out a hole beneath the ball, supporting its weight and minimizing friction. Note that the ball has a rod attached so one can view the ball spinning. Part of the interior of the ball has been hollowed out to counterbalance the weight of the rod. I will turn on the air pressure and position a weight at a predetermined balanced position. Thus, the center of mass of the ball rod weight is over the center of the ball. When we spin up the ball, we see that it will spin stably for a long while in this balanced position. I now move the weight outward. The ball is no longer balanced and it is more analogous to the oblate Earth. When I spin up the ball, we can now readily observe the slow change of the axis of rotation due to precession. Now remember that Earth's axis of rotation forms the basis for the celestial equatorial coordinate system. Thus, as the location of the vernal equinox and celestial poles change due to precession, the positions of stars in right ascension and declination also change. So although right now we have a fairly bright star in Polaris near the North Celestial Pole, that will no longer be true in about 1,000 years. Astronomical catalogs giving the positions of objects are typically updated every 50 or 100 years to the definition of the celestial equatorial system at that time, such as 1950 or 2000. And computer programs to process object coordinates to that system at the current time are ubiquitous. A telescope pointing system that doesn't take precession into account wouldn't be sufficiently accurate to be very useful.
Okay. So what it is telling us is that because of the wobble of the Earth, what has happened is that the north-south, poles or the magnetic alignment of the Earth is no more vertical like that. Actually, the Earth is tilted, and the poles are tilted. So hence what has happened is that the equator of the Earth is no more aligned to the sun directly. So what happens is that since there is an equator, as the Earth moves around, the sun, there is a point when it arrives directly upon the equator, right? And it happens twice a year, which are called the two equinoxes. The vernal equinox equates to a weather pattern when spring sets in. And spring brings growth on Earth, right? So after the severe weather, now the spring has come, the trees start turning green, the flowers come up, and everybody is happy and things are going good. It's also the season for agriculture, for growth. So spring marks a very important part. And so the vernal equinox, or the point where the spring equinox happens, is taken as a very important point in all calculations of astronomy and astrology as well. This tilt is from where it was originally, let's say thousands of years ago. And he said that every 26,000, it's taken 26,000 years or so for the Earth to kind of tilt to all the direction that it has, and it continues to tilt over a period of time. What we are interested in is, of course, the fact that is this tilt creating an observational shift in actually where we were earlier? So where I was, let's say, a few thousand years ago on Earth, now from that point when I was observing the skies has shifted a little bit. So what is thus shifted is that all the planetary positions that I observe from Earth have actually undergone a little bit of a change. And that is where the idea of ayanamsha comes in, okay? This is the chart for the spring equinox, which happens typically around 19th, 20th of March, is when the days and, the days change, all our daylight savings come in, the daylight savings go, all that is happening because of the shift, because the equinox is changing. So the Earth's tilt is like that. It has come in front of sun, but now as it goes further and further as it starts moving, different parts of the Earth start receiving different amounts of sunlight. And so the southern hemisphere has, the opposite of what the northern hemisphere will possibly go through in terms of weather patterns. But what is interesting to see is that in the year 300 CE, before Common Era, now what was happening is that the sun And we said Aries is where everything starts from, right? So if you look at the South Indian chart, you see Sun here, SU, 0, 0, that shows 0 degrees, 0 minutes. And it is moving in a clockwise direction. So Sun would be placed somewhere right at the border of Pisces and Aries, which would be 0 degrees. Because then 0 to 30 will be the span of this box. On the North Indian chart, Aries lies here on that particular day and time. And so Sun is in number 1, which is Aries, at 0, 0 degrees. And this is when the vernal equinox or the spring equinox had happened. So you've taken the date of exactly that moment. This was on the 20th of March, year 300. Okay. Now we move it to the present times. And what we want to observe is that again, when the vernal equinox is happening, what is happening to the position of Sun? Because the entire division of the zodiac and the counting of everything is from 0 degrees Aries. When we look at the next chart, we see the same equinox, the year 2024. So in the last about 2,800 years, what has happened is that the Sun on the day of the equinox is no more at 0, 0 degrees. It's actually now at 6 degrees Pisces, not even Aries. The Sun has moved from this box to this box, which means there is a difference of about close to 23 point some degrees, which the Sun has shifted. And that's exactly the tilt that we are talking about. So in Vedic astrology, this is called Ayanamsha, and you kind of adjust for this tilt and then recast the entire chart so that you're able to get the relative positions in the way they are supposed to be and not the distortion caused by the tilt of the earth. Now, there are multiple Ayanamshas you'll come through, multiple astronomers and astrologers or astrology scholars have kind of given it different calculations. What we use is called the Lahiri Ayanamsha or the Chitrapaksha Ayanamsha. The Lahiri Ayanamsha was formalized, about close to about maybe 40 years ago, after a big debate between the government of India and the priests of various temples as to when should various holidays be declared. When do you declare is Diwali? When do you declare is Holi? Because the whole idea of Hindu festivals was the placement of the moon in certain nakshatras. Now, if you don't account for this precession of the earth and the shift of the poles, you don't get a date which is uniform. You still don't do actually in India, because parts of North India will celebrate a festival on a certain day, and South India and East India will celebrate it a day earlier or a day after. So they then they said, okay, let's kind of create a agreed method of observing and fixing this. And so the gentleman who was appointed to head the committee, consult with all the scholars of the Hindu, pantheon, and then say, okay, what do we arrive at? They arrived at what is called the Lahiri Ayanamsha, which accounts for the exact shift that has happened. So 23 or whatever degrees is taken care of. So when you're using a software, most of the telephone, the mobile softwares check if they give you the Ayanamsha option and choose Lahiri as the option setting, either in a software or otherwise. A lot of softwares, the good ones, will give you multiple options, right? One of the most, interesting softwares is Jagannath Hora, okay, or J Hora as it is called. J Hora or Jagannath Hora is by the gentleman PVR Narasimha Rao, who's an IT guy based in US. He's a astrologer by family tradition. He created a software, and if you go there and look for Ayanamsha options, you'll get about 8 or 9 Ayanamsha options, right? And he has his own Ayanamsha option. So he says, with the changes and everything, the Ayanamsha, the time to change Ayanamsha, the degrees of the tilt has come. And so he talks about his own Ayanamsha. Almost every astrologer does. We follow K.N. Rao. And so K.N. Rao has been speaking of until now that he's alive. He's not said that there's a need to change it. And he says, maybe for the next few 100 years or 1,000 years, we don't need to change it because it's not going to be that perceptible. So maybe 1,000 years later, somebody wants to take recalibrate it and make a little shift, which is fine. So during our lifetime of astrology, I think Lahiri is good. Moving on, that's end of astronomy for all of us, all right? And let's get into astrology, which is what we really want to spend a lot of time on. So the skies, the zodiac, the nakshatras, and life on Earth, right? How is it influenced? What happens? Well, when we get a chart, the first thing is basis what and how were these various zodiacs decided, and how do you kind of reconcile to that? One way to remember it is always stories, right? And the South Indian chart kind of represents that whole idea very well. There is what is called, in the planets, a celestial cabinet, okay? The celestial cabinet, or the planetary cabinet, the cabinet of the stars, is thus, where Sun is represented as the king who looks after everything. The king is the one who is responsible for life. The king is responsible for the good of everyone. And Sun, being that source of life or source of energy for everything on planet Earth, was considered as the most supreme of the beings. The other prominent star that we all see, and I'm sure our ancients saw as well, was the moon. Softer, illuminating, but very gentle and very docile. Kind of waxes and wanes, right? Like a queen would feel the moods that may swing for them. And so hence considered moon to be the queen of the cabinet. In that princely estate, Mercury was considered as the prince, right? Mercury is a faster moving planet. It moves pretty fast. It's very close to the sun and the moon, especially the sun. In any chart you observe, you will always see that Mercury is always around the sun. It never leaves the sun very far. And so they said, this is like the child who's clinging on to his father. He wants to be next to his father, feels good about it. And so was the prince. Venus, who's always visible, is around, can be seen most of the times, was given the charge of being the minister of the court of the king and the queen, who would manage the day-to-day affairs, because he's constantly at gaze. He's there. We can see him in the morning. We can see him in the evening. He's always around, and he's always there hanging out. Mars was given the position of the commander-in-chief, right? Every kingdom needs a military head, right? Someone who will take care of things. Why was Mars given this particular position? Is because the movement of this planet or this graha is the most erratic. There is no consistency in it, right? If he's gone to war, he's extremely active and he's, completely embroiled in all the action. And then there are points when he's just resting completely. So his movement, when they observed, is possibly the most erratic, in the sense it is not consistent. Like the sun, we know, will rise at a certain time and will set at a certain time, basis which you can actually predict for the next 100 years the time of sunrise and sunset at any point on any point on Earth. It's that consistent, it is continuous. The others are as well, but Mars is like, there'll be times when he is moving extremely fast. There are times when he's absolutely slowed down. And so this was very impulsive, aggressive, someone who has, time zones of extreme aggression and then tends to take a lot of rest. So he was made the commander-in-chief. Jupiter was considered the priest, right? Jupiter is a sage planet. It represents priesthood. So it represents all the qualities of a priest, knowledge, etc., etc. And Saturn, of course, the lonely guy, absolutely on the outside, right? In dark, no one looks at him. Hardly you see him ever. He's like then on the outermost part of this whole arrangement. And so was considered like an outcast, almost given the category of a servant. So what they did was, they said, in this court, now sun and moon, the queen and the king, decided to erect their own palaces, so to say, right? So the sun was given Leo. Leo represents the lion. And so that association of royalty, the association of kingship, power, right? Leo was assigned to sun as being the most representative of what that star pattern looked like. After sun got his palace, obviously, right next to the king, you get the queen's palace. And so the moon was given the chamber right next to the king in Cancer. Cancer, when we study Rashis, we will see it represents a certain, and they all are animal shapes, right? So it represents the crab. The crab is hard from the outer side, but very soft on the inside, prefers to kind of stay in their own domain, not very aggressive, unless you, of course, kind of go and poke them. But they're not aggressive. They're not predator kind of animals. Once the moon and sun got their houses, the next was the chance of Mercury. So Mr. Mercury goes to, sun and says, I'm growing up, I'm an adolescent, I need my own room, or I need my own little palace, right? So the sun said, yeah, you're my dear boy, I love you, so I'll give you one right next to mine. And so he gave him, right next to sun, Mercury got a palace. Well, he went to mother and said, he says, Mom, see, dad is so cool. He's given me a house of my own. What can you do for me? Moon, the mother, is always attached to the child. She said, of course, you will live next to me also. So when you're with your father, it's fine. Other times, come and see me. And so sun, moon, Mercury got allocated plots right next to each other. They built their palaces. And then the kingdom expanded and the minister was appointed. Now, the king doesn't have the time to tutor the child. So he says, Mr. Minister, what I want you to do is, I'm going to give you a house right next to him, close enough to both of us so that we know that you're around. But your job is to tutor Mercury, nurture the prince, teach him statecraft, take care of him. And so Venus got his houses right next to the prince, so that he can have easy access to him, tutor him, meet him whenever. Mars, the commander-in-chief, got a little perturbed, and he said, I protect your boundaries. I protect the kingdom. I fight all the people who come to invade it. Where is my palace? And so the king said, hey, this is a guy I cannot take, I cannot afford to kind of upset him. He's loyal. And so immediately he asked for his quarters to be constructed right next to the ministers. And so Mars, the commander-in-chief, got his palaces. Jupiter, the priest, was left lurching in the background, and he said, Mr. King, please don't forget that I am the opium of the masses, right? It is because of what I tell them that they believe in your divinity. Remember the whole story behind the church and the king, right? And how it evolved in Europe and everywhere. The priest was always a very central figure to kind of to kind of ordain the king to be the divine power. And so hence the masses would kind of just follow him and believe him to be the incarnation of God. And so Jupiter got his, plots right next to Mars, a little away from the court, but then the priest is always busy doing his own prayers and is doing his chart. So he's not really bothered with the court politics. He's not interested in court politics at all. Lastly, they all need servants to take care of things for them. And so hence, the servants were given the 2 quarters of Aquarius and Capricorn, the farthest away from the sun and the moon, around after every war, all the plots were distributed. The last of the 2 plots went to Saturn, which was Aquarius and Capricorn, and hence came to be the division of how the planetary distribution of various zodiacs was made. Now, what is interesting is that while we will memorize most of the stuff, but the planetary cabinet is very interesting because it has a lot of symbolic value, right? Symbolic value in terms of what almost each of the planets represent as their intrinsic nature, right? So they were labeled and called that because of the nature of that planet, the way that planet is observed in the sky, the color, and everything else. Mars, being the red, fiery planet, was given the role of, the fighter or the commander-in-chief. Having distributed all of this, right, we automatically get to see something interesting. The sun and moon are, of course, husband and wife, king and queen, so they will always be very friendly towards each other, right? They depend upon each other. They are partners for each other. Now, however, when I say that, that's a good definition of it, right? We also know that partners do not coexist together very well. There can be trouble between the husband and the wife or the king and the queen. And so a lot of stuff, but by intrinsic nature, they tend to stay together. They tend to support each other. Mars is highly loyal, commander-in-chief. He's loyal to the sun. Commander-in-chief, most of the times, represented well, is loyal and not ambitious for power of the sun. He doesn't want to be the king, right? He wants to serve the king, be loyal, and be the fighter that he is. So he is absolutely loyal to the sun and the moon. The king and the queen is who he protects. Jupiter, the priest, his existence is because there is a king, right? The whole idea that he creates the divinity of the king is because there is a king. So his loyalty to the king remains unchallenged. He remains loyal to the king and the queen to protect them. And hence, in astrology, when we divide camps of the planets as to who goes along with whom and who does not go along with whom, we get a camp of Sun, Moon, Mars, and Jupiter, who are friendly to each other. So if Sun is visiting Moon's house or Mars's house or Jupiter's house or any of them visiting each other's houses, they feel comfortable, they feel relaxed. It's like they're going to the house of someone where they are welcomed, right? The other camp that we get, an interesting one, is the minister. Now, the minister is a wily guy. The minister is embroiled in court politics. He is the politician of that court. He uses every means available, diplomacy, maybe even creating charades and creating conspiracies to be able to retain his power and continue to influence the king and the court. So the Venus, who is the minister, is also a planet of diplomacy, right? He's not an aggressive planet. He is a planet who's like a minister, uses diplomacy to get across things. He's the one who organizes all the song and dance in the court of the king. So he's associated with music and arts and paintings and everything and everything. His job and his existence, now Venus is always the minister in the court is not a very, is somehow always, if you look at period dramas, etc., the main courtier or the prime minister is a bit insecure at all points in time, right? If you've seen British period, Churchill and these various television shows, there is always this thing between the prime minister and the royalty, right? So there is that, it's not a very great relationship because the king is the king, but yet he's kind of handed over a lot of powers to the minister to exercise and likes to keep a check on him. So since the sun depends upon Venus to tutor Mercury, he's made friends with the prince and uses the prince to influence the king. That's the politics he plays. He says, as long as the prince is with me and the prince speaks for me in the court, I remain intact. So he makes sure that Mercury is always, around him and he's taking care of Mercury. And Mercury feels good because this is, besides his father, he is the second most powerful person in the kingdom, and he has access through Venus to a lot of things. Now, Venus, remember, is the song and dance guy. He's the arts and music guy. He is the person who will take, Venus and Mercury and get him do a lot of things. So Mercury is very influenced very soon. Mercury gets perturbed by something or the other very soon. He's very impressionable, so to say, because he's an adolescent. Now, what does Venus do? Venus bribes the servants to make sure that things are running in the court the way he wants them. So Saturn is like the servants of the court who stand in the shadows behind curtains and walls, who are then beckoned by the minister for getting his agenda managed, whether he has to get something for Mercury, could it be wine or whatever? It could be anything else that he wants to indulge the king with. And so the servants are used by Venus most effectively. Mercury's learned that, so they both know that they can handle the servants very well, who are always looking for some money or looking for some reward to exist. And so these three people get together very well. They are like friends. This group is friends, but then each of the members of the group do not get along with each other very well. Mercury is the son of the king, but then the king doesn't want him to be a liability. So the king kind of keeps a hands-off thing. He loves him. He's absolutely fine with the Mercury hanging around. But Mercury wants to exert himself as the prince. He wants to exert his power and authority. And who does he do that with? Well, Mars for sure, because he tells Mars every time he's planning a war campaign saying, listen, I'll tell you what to do. I am the prince. And Mars says, just get out of here because you don't know this. So there's a conflict between them. Jupiter, well, Mercury, the prince, is under the influence of the artsy and the luxury holder Venus. And Jupiter says, be pious. Jupiter says, be noble, be ascetic, come and do dharma with me. And Mercury says, hey man, get off. This is not the time for me. I want to go party. So Jupiter and Mercury have this relationship where Jupiter is hands off, doesn't bother. And Mercury is kind of saying, the guy sermonizes too much. Every time I go and sit with him, the guy just starts off on something and goes on, and it gets boring for me. And so forth and so on. And we will, I'll share a table with you, which will give you a little more, which will give you a more accurate relationship table. Some of them are neutral towards each other. Like, for example, Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter doesn't bother about the servants. He's a noble guy. He's saying, okay, fine, you're doing what you're doing. That is your job to do. And he will get them to do whatever he wants done, but doesn't use coercion, nothing at all. He says, even if you guys are not here, I can still do things on my own. So they don't have a love-hate relationship like that. Some of them have a very strong love-hate relationship. Some of them are neutral towards each other. And it's important to kind of gradually memorize it, because when we go to the interpretive side of charts, we will see that the manifestation of that planet is comfortable or uncomfortable. Is he coming from a position of comfort, or is he disturbed at that point in time, occupying that particular person's house? Because he could be, the sun could be sitting anywhere. And if the sun is sitting in Saturn's house, it's like he feels the most undignified because he's visiting a servant's quarter. It's not the natural place for him to be. And so the manifestation of whatever sun represents could be a little unbalanced or a little disturbed. And that helps us in the interpretive side. Now that's the 7 big guys taken care of. We are still left with Rahu, Ketu. Right? Rahu, Ketu are not physical planets. They are just points where the eclipses happen. So the points in the zodiac where the eclipse happens is really what termed as the points of Rahu and Ketu, right? So whenever the sun, moon, and earth will align in a certain way, we either get a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. So the point at which these happen is called, what termed as Rahu and Ketu, or they are called the north node and the south node of the sun. The sun, the solar eclipse being a very significant event whenever it does happen, as observed from Earth. Given the relationships, however, Rahu, given the nature of Rahu, right, and we will study this in the next few classes about each of the planets, he was termed to be put here in the side of Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Rahu. That seems to be a camp of 4 people. Ketu is neutral, because when we study the story of Ketu and Rahu and we kind of understand the mythological significance, we will realize that Ketu is not Ketu is not a harmful planet or a body, whereas Rahu definitely has a slightly deviant agenda. With that, I'll send you this slide. So this is just a recap of whatever we've done so far. We get the 12 numbers, we get the zodiac signs, we get the planets who rule each of these. So Aries is given to Mars, Taurus to him, Cancer, Leo, Moon, Sun, exactly the planetary distribution of the cabinet. Each of the signs labeled for exactly the way they are. A quick summary of how you look at the chart in terms of what are the numbers, what is the bhava, how do they move, etc., etc. Right. So at this point in time, we just want to start getting a fix on which zodiac is ruled by which particular planet, right? So which part of the zodiac is allocated to the king, to the prince, to the minister, to the priest, etc., etc. Sun and moon, as you notice, have only one house each, right? They own only one zodiac. The others rule two signs each. You'll see Mars come in Aries, Mars come in Scorpio, because there were two plots given to all the other planets except for Sun and Moon, right? They have one palace each. The other guys have these palaces on both sides of the king's palace. Once we get this a little bit in place, we will then move on next time into now getting into understanding the significations and the mythologies behind all of this. See, what happens is that stories, like I told you earlier, stories are the best way to remember some of these things, right? So planetary significations are difficult, but there are so many of them. But if we get the mythology right, we understand the stories associated with each of the planets, we start getting an idea of what this planet is all about, what he rules, what he does, what are the qualities that he represents, right? So we'll start drawing some of those ideas from that. We'll leave it here. I don't want to, take too much at one time. We'll chew in gradual bites so that we move a little well-paced. We're able to keep things in our mind. We'll do a quiz again around this sometime. We'll do a WhatsApp quiz again, like the poll that you did last week. There may not be much reading material, but from what we studied last week, there is the relevant material in Light on Life. If you have that, I'll send you the page numbers on Light on Life. Because I found that Light on Life was written with a very deep thought. I think somewhere Hart Defoe and Robert were possibly really fascinated when they were writing this, and it's been worded very well. Covers a little more expansive material compared to what you would have read in Mark's book. So that would be the reading for this week. And the next week, we'll take the next step into a little more depth. Is that okay? So far, so good. Any thoughts? I'll post the slides on. I'll share the slide on the planetary distribution of the cabinet and the cabinet, the whole thing. Relationships, we will get deeper into it a little later. So I'm not. I just give you a working idea of connecting the planetary cabinet members to each other on how you think the court functions, what happens. What are the various behaviors of each of these characters? If this was a prince, what do you expect him to behave like? The Sun and Mars are sitting in some strategy meeting about an attack on a kingdom, and the prince walks in. You can kind of start getting the dynamics of what's going on. Mars is trying to kind of tell the king that we should do this, but Venus comes and starts playing politics. So you can imagine how Mars then looks at Venus and how Venus looks at Mars. Venus is threatened by the fact that this guy is, the king respects him a lot. And so Venus feels threatened by the commander-in-chief. Whether the commander-in-chief kind of says, I don't like your politics. Why the hell do you play politics? Why can't you be just straight and do what you need to do, right? So try and imagine these characters in your mind and see how that court is playing out. Where is Saturn? I mean, in the shadows somewhere, lurking behind, right? Doing a lot of stuff. They are the guys who do the entire work in a household or in a court or wherever they are. The servants are extremely important, and so forth and so on. Spend some time imagining that, and then we'll meet again next week. Yeah. Any questions or anything you'd like to say before we close with our prayers?
I have a question, Sandeep.
Yes, Srikar.
You've mentioned Rahu and Ketu are points of eclipses, right? So I was wondering, maybe it's too early to ask, but can we look at chart and then
Absolutely.
And then guess when would be the next eclipse or something like that?
Absolutely, you can do.
Okay.
So there was a solar eclipse recently, right?
Yeah.
And there was another one which happened when Donald Trump was born.
Okay.
So he was born on a solar eclipse, right?
Okay.
And we'll also look at saying in a chart, when you look at how can you distinguish between a solar eclipse versus a lunar eclipse. So you can even make that differentiation by looking at the chart. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So there's a point when we'll study Rahu Ketu a little technical also stuff. Then I'll correlate it to see on a how do you spot it on a chart. Yeah. So if you have Donald Trump's chart,
thank you.
Oh, look at that. That's 100% eclipse.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. He was born on eclipsed, behaves, I don't know, eclipsed or non-eclipsed, but interesting to see what it has done to him as an individual, being born in a certain pattern of planets. It's a very interesting chart. We'll soon be there. And I think, 3-4 months, and I think we should be dabbling with the initial little bit of, what's going on, right? We'll complete some technical stuff and get there. Okay, so until next Sunday, all of you, thank you for coming in today. Let's close with our prayers. Brahma Murari Tripurantakari Bhanu Shashi Bhumi Suto Budascha Guru Cha Shukro Shani Rahu Keto Sarve Graha Shanti Kara Bhavan. Okay, see you then next Sunday. Until then, take care. I'll send out some slides, a small quiz, and some reference reading material.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.